So this session is on methodologies and tools. So it's our third session. And let's go to the next slide, please. Great. And we've got Brendan Owens. He's the Chief of Engineering for the U.S. Green Building Council. In that role, Brendan has led the effort to establish the system goals for LEED version 4 and is building on this work as the foundation to integrate other programs USGBC collaborates on. He's also a member of the New Buildings Institute and is Deputy Director of the Center for Cycling Technology at USGBC. So welcome to Brendan, and let's hit the next slide. Great. Brendan, take it away.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to get to participate in this. I think it's a great conversation, and I really have enjoyed a couple of the engagement platforms that my CERTA has organized around this roadmap. And it's great to be able to be at this stage where they're talking about, we all are talking about this piece of the puzzle, because it does matter. But if you can go to the next slide, I just want to make sure that we continue to realize that all carbon is carbon, and all of it contributes to atmospheric loadings and the associated forcings that come with it. So the conversation here, I know that we've spent a lot of time talking about what more we can do, but we also need to make sure that we're doing much, much more what we're already doing. So all the places that the roadmap has already tread or been built to be tread on at some point in the future is something that we need to ensure that we don't lose sight of. And one of the things that I want to emphasize here is that the conversation that we're having about embodied is a conversation about now versus later, because all of the carbon that we're going to emit as a society is going to end up where it's going to end up. But the next 10 years is consequential. So when I started this afternoon saying that it would be great if we had tools to be able to do parametric analysis and iterative analysis that looked at that next inch of insulation in terms of what it gives us for energy efficiency in the year 2040 or 2050 versus what it gives us for reduced embodied emissions today. This is where the nexus of those two things comes together, because the savings over the next 10 years, emissions over the next 10 years, when we're looking at a 1.5 degree tipping point in 2040 or 2050, are hugely consequential. And it's important for us to understand that these two things are not in competition, but they definitely need to be assessed within the realm of the ability for us to be able to make the best decision that we can. So on that platform, if we can go to the next slide, the piece of the puzzle that I was asked to chat about was the various tools that project teams and designers and construction managers can avail themselves of when they are looking to address the embodied carbon of the decision within the decision realms that they have. So this is primarily a discussion about what the opportunities are with respect to new construction and major renovation. I would say that in all the conversation that I've had, I want to just totally agree with all the people who have talked about reuse of existing buildings as being the pinnacle of where we should be headed. In addition to the embodied carbon savings, there's myriad of other things that people have understood about the benefit of reusing existing buildings over the years that accrue societally from that standpoint as well. But because we are going to build some new buildings between now and when this roadmap ends, the way that USGBC has addressed this and the way that our tool section is addressed around this is looking at the way that life cycle assessment can inform design, how product manufacturers can play a role in design optimization of their piece of the puzzle, and then how construction teams can procure low carbon construction materials. And if you can go to the next slide, there's various intervention points and things that project teams should be focused on and should take the opportunity to be more proactive around in each of these pieces. I'm going to focus on the design team and a little bit on the construction team because I know Beth is coming after me to talk about her cool thing. But the places that we are encouraging project teams to focus deal with building component reuse first, whole building LCA, lifecycle assessment of interior decisions. So there's the big heavy stuff that goes into the design and construction of a new building, which includes all the structure, includes all of the building enclosure. But over the course of the life of that building, there is churn. The carpet's going to wear out, the furniture is going to be replaced. All of that churn activity is another opportunity to incorporate low embodied carbon and better optimize decisions for embodied carbon in those pieces. And then lastly, making sure that we are reducing the amount of stuff that we're using overall by focusing on waste prevention and structural optimization. So life cycle assessment does a couple of things. It gives you an idea of what's going on with your carbon signature of the materials that you're using, but it should also principally be used at the design stage to understand where you can actually eliminate the use of certain materials here and there. So if you can go to the next slide. The tools that I would like to
Brendan, 1 minute.
Yep, the tools I'd just like to highlight in terms of use are listed on this slide. I'll spend some particular time looking at the whole building LCA tools. So if you don't know what Tally is, or Athena Impact Estimator, or One-Click LCA, or Beacon, I encourage you to take a look at these as mechanisms to be able to give you better informed decision-making around embodied carbon from a life cycle assessment perspective. So Tally and Beacon are both Revit plugins. Athena Impact Estimator is a standalone tool, as is the One-Click LCA. So if we can go to the next slide, I want to talk about how these are applied in a framework like LEED. It's the one that I know best, so it's the one that I'm most comfortable talking about. There are a couple places that these tools get employed in LEEDs by projects seeking LEED certification. If you can go to the next slide. The discussion here is about how this tool, the application of the whole building LCA tools is addressed in LEED version 4.1, the Building Lifecycle Impact Reduction Credit, which is one of the most important materials and resources credits in the rating system. We prioritize the reuse of existing buildings and blighted buildings, but then when you go down to the use of LCA tools, we are asking project teams to optimize their lifecycle assessment for all the different parameters that we've talked about. So you go to the next slide. This is where a tool like the Embodied Carbon Construction Calculator, like Beth is going to be talking about, comes into play. This is a credit that is focused on the construction side of the discussions that we've been having about how construction teams and general contractors can specify low carbon construction materials, and we are seeking to incentivize the use of that type of thinking at this stage of the game. Just one piece of the puzzle that I just want to end on is looking at making sure that you are not confusing life cycle assessment and procurement of low carbon construction materials as conflicting, or you only need to do one. The best projects are doing optimized design and then utilizing low carbon construction materials. And if I have one more second to go on, if you can flip to slide, the one that says low carbon, healthy, and circular, which is just another, end the conversation here with a plug for, one more down, I think, with a plug for integrative thinking across all of these discussions to make sure that we are not sacrificing the health signatures of the materials that we're using for low embodied carbon, and making sure that we are making informed decisions across the spectrum of opportunities that we have with respect to these, employing tools like Tally, like Beacon, like One-Click LCA, and like Athena Impact Estimator, and like the EC3 tool, which I believe Beth Heider is queued up to talk about now.
Brendan, thank you for that overview from the work at Green Building Council. You gave us a lot of thoughtful tools, shared a lot of high-level tools with us and thinking methodologies, and so really appreciate that insight. Let's go to the next slide to the bio for Beth. There we go. So Beth Heider is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Skanska USA, and as Chief Sustainability Officer, she translates Skanska's commitment to sustainability in action while serving on Skanska's USA's management team. She supports Skanska's U.S. construction and development business units with combined annual revenues of approximately $7 billion. Beth, welcome and take it away.
Thanks. Hey, so Skanska has made a global commitment to deliver more sustainable and resilient solutions to our customers. And we've made a commitment to the Paris Agreement, and we've made a commitment to be transparent in reporting our progress along that journey. And so we've set targets to reduce our impact through how we build and what we build to get to net zero carbon by 2045. And we've committed to working with both our customers and partners, like the Great Carbon Leadership Forum and NYSERDA, to transform the entire supply chain. We certainly can't do it alone. Next slide, please. Next. There we go. Okay, so as Kate pointed out, for buildings, carbon is a battle on two major fronts, embodied and operational. For the past 3 years, we've actually been working with USGBC to co-develop a tool to address operational carbon and to provide market insight. The tool, which is aptly called Insight, is available through USGBC's ARC platform at insight@arconline.io. But today, I'm actually going to be talking about the other front, and I'll be introducing you to a tool that we've co-developed with the Carbon Leadership Forum to address embodied carbon. Next slide. Next. The Embodied Carbon and Construction Calculator, EC3 for short, focuses on carbon smart material selection. And its objective is to reduce carbon emissions across the entire building supply chain. It has the desire to be openly available with the ability to share data with other tools. And Stacy Smedley from Skanska's Seattle office secured a Skanska Innovation Grant to work with Kate, the Carbon Leadership Forum, Sea Change Labs, Microsoft, and many others to develop this EC3 tool. Next slide. Next. Now, as Brendan alluded to, there are embodied carbon impacts over the life of a project. EC3, at least right now, addresses embodied carbon at the product stage that looks at material extraction, transport, and manufacturing. Next slide. Next. EC3 supports decisions that are made early in design when you can actually make a difference. A lot of the modeling tools in the past were tools that allowed you to understand how much carbon was in, but it was done after the fact, so you didn't really have a chance to make an impact. So the EC3 tool actually takes quantities that would be developed for cost estimates early in the design phase. Then you multiply them by the embodied carbon equivalent that is taken from EPDs, which of course are like nutrition labels for building products. And then the tool generates an embodied carbon estimate. It's pretty simple math. Next slide. Next. Now, to provide some context, the Carbon Leadership Forum collected carbon footprint data from over 1,000 buildings and created an open source benchmarking calculator based on building type to set baselines. So it makes the numbers really relevant. And by searching the database of EPDs, you can compare manufacturers within a designated area, and then you can map them to the baselines, which gives you a sense of what is reasonably achievable. Next slide. And I think really importantly, the EC3 captures the digitized EPDs in a format that is downloadable. And that's really important as a library resource in a consistent format that standardizes reporting and makes it easier for suppliers. Next slide. The EC3 tool can then roll all of your selections up into a graphic report that summarizes embodied carbon by material as taken from the estimate on the far left side, rolled into parametric or uniformat breakdowns, and then summarized for the entire project. And again, this informs the team early enough to make decisions. In each case, you can see that the full bar shows the conservative EC estimate, really more business as usual, And then the dark part at the bottom of each bar shows the achievable EC target. And the lighter bar in between essentially shows you the range that you're shooting in from business as usual to an achievable embodied carbon target. Next slide.
1 minute, Beth.
Sure. Next. EC3 is building out the materials that have the greatest carbon footprint first. And so you can see that there are over 22,000 EPDs for concrete. In our own development projects at Skanska, we're focusing on concrete, steel, and exterior closure. And we're focusing on standing up the internal procedures and contract language that will ensure success. Next slide. Next. The EC3 enjoys a great group of sponsors, as Kate mentioned earlier, and a new nonprofit, Building Transparency, which was established to continue the EC3's development. Now, at Skanska, we've already seen the incredible potential to reduce embodied carbon by using the EC3 tool on a major project in the Pacific Northwest. Just by requesting EPDs from our local concrete suppliers, we were able to reduce the CO2 in concrete on that job by about 30% at no additional cost. That bears repeating, a reduction of 30% at no additional cost. And that reduction will help our customer on that project reduce their carbon reduction goals. And it's begun the dialogue that will also help transform the concrete supply chain, which will then, of course, help us reach our 2045 goal of net zero carbon along the entire supply chain, which requires, of course, that we work together. That's it.
Thank you. Impressive work that Skanska is doing with your